sort of one of my favorite topics, Nimrod. I think the title that went out was actually Michael Hornstein's idea to some extent. Nimrod was one of the first kings of the world. He actually, the sages say in a Medrash that there were 10 different people, I should say really 9 people, but 10s who ruled over the entire world, one of whom was Nimrod, who was the king of the entire world. Solomon, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech was another one of them. So that's why we titled the class, this is like I said, Michael's idea, No Kings. We were going to talk a little bit about his role as the king over humanity. We're going to explore the relationship, the story of Nimrod and Avraham Avinu. And we're going to discuss what gave Nimrod his special power and what ultimately was his negative trait that he embodied more than anybody else. That's an introduction to some of the themes that we're going to be discussing tonight. So the start of Nimrod is really at the end of Parshat Noach. If you go to chapter 10, verse 8, Yud Ches. So again, Noah had 3 sons. Noah had 3 sons. Shem, who the Jewish people are descended from. So the first one was Shem. Ham, who is sort of the, I guess, more of the African continent, sort of Mitzrayim and those sort of areas. And Yafes.
Isn't Ham mentioned in the Shmuel?
Who?
Shmuel Grossant?
Who?
I thought there was, at least there's a reference to Ham.
Could be. I don't have it off the top of my head.
It wasn't.
It could be. So, one of Ham's children, his name was Cush, the father of modern day Ethiopia, I think. And the pasuk in pasuk Ches, verse 8, it says, "V'Chush yalad es Nimrod." Cush gave birth to Nimrod, who heichel liyois gibor ba'aretz. And Nimrod started to be a warrior in the world. Okay? Hu haya gibor tzayid. He was this strong trapping man. Lifnei Hashem, in front of God. Al kain ye amar ken Nimrod gibor tzayid lifnei Hashem. That's why when people are, let's see how exactly translate, but that's what it says. Like Nimrod, he is a strong trapping man in front of Hashem. And people who have this particular midah, this particular trait, they're compared to Nimrod. We'll see what that means. Rashi famously says that, what does it mean that Nimrod was this very powerful trapper? Literally means he trapped animals, but figuratively, Rashi says, it says, Tzad daitan shel brius. He captured the minds of people, the fiv, with his mouth. Mitan limroid b'makom. And he caused them to rebel against God. That was Nimrod's deceit. He would trap people, convince them of a certain ideology, and bring them into his camp to rebel against God. And ultimately, he led the people to build the Tower of Bavel, the Tower of Babylon. That was Nimrod. Nimrod was the mastermind, the chief architect of the Tower of Babylon. And Rashi says that Nimrod wasn't just doing this for practical purposes. He actually wanted to make Hashem angry. That was his desire. He wanted to make Hashem angry. So what's the story of Nimrod? How did he become the king of humanity? What lessons can we learn from his life? So I'm sure people have a little bit of knowledge about Nimrod, but what are some of the things that people know about Nimrod? He's not mentioned that much in the actual Torah.
And they drops you through Avraham into the fiery furnace.
Right. So that's probably the most famous thing about Nimrod, is that he was the one who threw Avraham Avinu, the forefather of the Jewish people, into a fiery furnace.
I thought that was Daniel.
That's another that happened in Nebuchadnezzar later.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good connection. It's interesting. Sure, that's an interesting conflict for exploration. The connection between Nimrod and Nebuchadnezzar. That's definitely an interesting thing to think about. Anything else? What else do people know about Nimrod?
He started or coordinated the building of the
Right, the Tower of Bavel.
Tower of Babylon.
Right. Anyone else on Zoom? Anyone else have any knowledge of Nimrod?
See, one of the kings that Avraham defeated.
Yeah, very good. Amarphel, who was one of the 4 kings, we'll see in the upcoming Parshias, that one of the king's names was Amarphel. Was one of the king's names. And Rashi says that word is actually a contraction of 2 words. Amar, he said, fell, fall. And it's referring to Nimrod, who made Avraham fall into a fiery furnace. So Nimrod makes sort of a cameo later on. Anything else people know about Nimrod?
What does it for me?
Does anyone remember how Nimrod died? To Rashi later. We're going to talk about that. That's also a very interesting story. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history of Nimrod. Where did he come from? How did he get to who he was? So, first thing to know about Nimrod, again, like we said, he was a descendant of Ham. Ham was supposed to be the cursed child of Noach. Ham was cursed by Noach for what he did to Noach. There's different opinions about exactly what he did to Noach. You can look into the commentaries. We're not going to go into that right now. But Ham gave birth to Cush. Cush gave birth to Nimrod. Now, what gave Nimrod his power? Because I'll say a very interesting thing. After Adam Harishon, after Adam, the first man, was expelled from the Garden of Eden, really, in the process of being expelled, God made for him, right, he realized him and his wife, Eve, Chava, they realized they weren't clothed. They tried to cover themselves up. This was like, a fig leaf. And ultimately, God made for them katanis or a certain type of garment, a special garment he made for them. A garment, Chazal say, had, pictures of animals, different sorts of interesting sort of artwork on it. Ultimately, those garments found their way to Noach. He had those garments in his possession. And Ham ended up stealing them from him. He stole these garments from Noach and gave them to his descendant, Nimrod. So Nimrod came into possession of these garments. Now, these garments weren't your normal shirt and pants. They had a special power. The wearer of these garments would be able to attract all different sorts of animals to him, and that would make him basically this unbelievable hunter. He'd be able to hunt any animal he want. And Nimrod had this power. He wore these garments. People didn't realize where this power was coming from, so they attributed it to Nimrod's greatness. It's like he was able to hunt down all of these animals, and that obviously was the currency back then. I mean, you're able to eat, you can live, and you can support other people. And automatically, what ended up happening was that Nimrod was able to build a following. He had these special garments from Adam, and he was able to use them to bring people into his following. And people thought he must be an amazingly strong person, as much as he was able to hunt all these animals down. It attracted the animals to him, and it was something that seemed way beyond the natural law of nature. But like this, Nimrod was able to build a following and convince people sort of a warped ideology, where we're very recently after the flood at this point, where this is really very, very soon after the whole story with Noah. And even so soon to the times of Noah, he was able to convince a whole generation of people that it would be the right thing to do to go and rebel against God. So you have to think, what exactly was this ideology? Where were they coming from that they could possibly think this was the right thing? They knew Noah. They could go and talk to Noah. So that's one question I want everyone to sort of think about. Does anyone have a thought about that? Why? How could it be so soon after the generation of Noah, you already have people who think, oh, it's the right thing to go and rebel against God.
Look at Egel Zahav.
Look at the Egel Zahav, right?
That was right after. So,
Well, the Egel Zahav, I could say, in a sense, came out from such an incredible revelation. People could have been overwhelmed from that revelation, and then ultimately, made mistakes.
I was about to say the same thing.
Oh, if you want to say that happened over here,
Kind of overwhelmed by the catastrophe.
or got overwhelmed by the catastrophe.
Yes.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting.
And then blaming God for it.
Blaming God for it.
Yes. Look what God did.
Look what God did to us.
Yes.
You're saying taking the exact wrong message out of what happened.
Exactly.
And instead of, oh, wow, look, we were actually, in a sense, it's our ancestors saying we were saved, taking the wrong message from
Which is what
the flood.
Nimrod's the first politician. He's like,
Right. You can put a prey on that.
yes, right.
Literally prey on it.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Any other ideas?
I'm just listening.
Okay. So this is what Nimrod does. He convinces the entire generation it's the right thing. We're going to go to rebel against God. We're going to build a Tower of Bavel. Some also say that the intention behind the Tower of Bavel, the Tower of Babylon, was to build a structure tall enough that it would be impervious to future floods. They're a pretty smart, architectural thing to do. Let's build a big tower, and no matter how tall a flood it could be, it's not going to cover our tower. So another aspect of their mistake, if we could, get into their mindset a little bit, was they were scared. What could it be in the future? This might happen. We understand that when a terrible catastrophe happens, we want to do whatever we can to prevent it for the future.
Because they didn't know about the Keshet. They didn't know about the...
Interesting. That's an interesting point. Why did they know about the Keshet? In the Keshet, Hashem promised Noah not to make a flood again.
Yeah.
So why were they frightened? No, maybe there's going to be another flood.
Maybe there's another reason.
So I'm saying that's the reason brought down by the sages.
Man.
So you have to sort of work out why they would have known about that promise between God and Noah. Maybe they didn't take God's promises so seriously. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't have an answer to that. In any case, so like I said, Nimrod became the king over the world. He drew people towards him. He drew people towards Avodah Zarah, towards idol worship. Ultimately, Nimrod declares himself a deity. He says, I have this incredible power. I could, have this power over animals. He says, I'm the deity. You can all worship the sun, the moon, and water, and fire, and also me too. So he is now a deity in the eyes of his followers. And this sort of personality just keeps growing and growing and growing. Interestingly enough, one day astrologers come to him. This is after the times of the Tower of Bavel. Actually, no, it's not after the Tower of Bavel. This is before the Tower. This is actually before astrologers come to him and they say, listen, there's, we see through our astrology, we can tell there's going to be a male child born who's going to overthrow you. Doesn't spell good news for Nimrod. So what does Nimrod do? In a very interesting parallel to Pharaoh, to Paro, he decrees that all male children born are going to be killed. He commits the first instance of infanticide in history. And the sages say, there were 700,000 children that were killed by Nimrod because he was frightened one of these children might grow up to be the person that's going to overthrow me. So he killed all these children. He said all the women have to give birth in a certain place, and therefore, my guards, my henchmen, they'll be there to be able to recognize when it's a male child and when it's a female child and know which children to put to death. So like that, he kills 700,000 babies. And even after all that, his astrologers come back. I skipped a step. Nimrod had a very trusted advisor. Can anyone guess who his trusted advisor was?
Gonna be Bilam.
Bilam, that's interesting. Bilam was one of the advisors of Paro.
Yes, the Gothar. I was about to say it's too early for that.
You're thinking on the right line though. Any other ideas? Who was Bilam? Who was Nimrod's trusted advisor? Lavan. That's also an interesting thought. I don't know if Lavan was born yet. I don't think I was. I'll tell you and you'll say, oh, of course. He had a trusted advisor named Terach, the father of Avraham Avinu. Terach was one of the advisors of Nimrod, a very, very close friend, trusted advisor to the king Nimrod. And as a matter of course, when the whole decree of infanticide came up, of course, it was understood that Terach would be exempted. The king's inner circle, inner advisor, he's not going to be subject to the terrible decree. And it just so happens that Terach's wife was pregnant during this whole episode. And she was able to...
Haran.
What is that?
That's why they went to Haran.
No, that's later already. That's later. And she was able to give birth without this decree. Now, that didn't stop the astrologers. The astrologers said, listen, we see on top of Terach's house, there's a whole star show going on. Clearly, that's where this baby is. And ultimately, Terach and his wife had to hide Avraham Avinu in a cave. That was where Avraham Avinu, Abraham, was spent the first couple of years of his life, was in this cave, away from Nimrod and his henchmen.
What do you mean, Rabbi, about stars open?
The astrologers were able to read stars. So they saw that there was some sort of celestial activity going on above Terach's house, whatever that, again, I don't know how astrology works. They were able to see this and realize that's where this child is. That's where this child is going to be. So they realized very clearly that Terach's son was the one who was going to be this threat to Nimrod's kingdom. This is all really very strong parallel to what goes on many generations later with Pharaoh, with Paro, who was told also by his astrologers there was going to be a Jewish baby who was going to bring about an end to his kingdom, who was going to be Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's these parallels definitely need exploring. I'm not sure we're going to get to it all today, but there's definitely a lot to talk about. But anyway, in any case, let's continue the story a little bit. So Avraham Avinu is growing up in a cave, away from the rest of civilization. And Avraham Avinu starts to think, what's going on? Why am I here? What's the purpose of the world? And he starts to ask himself simple questions. He's a boy of 2 or 3. And he's basically all alone in the world. And he's thinking of all the important questions in life. Why am I here? What are we doing? And at first he thinks, okay, I guess the sun, the moon, the stars, that's what I'm meant to be worshiping over here. But ultimately he rejects all the different foreign types of gods, and he comes to the conclusion that there must be an unseen creator who was the one to create all of existence, the physical and spiritual worlds, and through that he was able to find Hashem. It was specifically because he was in this cave away from civilization, he was able to devote his mind and his heart to thinking about the world, thinking about the purpose of the world. He was able, through his own reason, through his own heart, to discover Hashem. And at this point, he commits himself fully to the truth of God, to the truth that one's life is supposed to be devoted to bringing God's presence into the world, to bringing God's mission to reality. He devotes himself heart and soul to that mission. So at this point, I'm not 100% clear about this, but it seems that for whatever reason, this decree against children was dropped. They forgot about the whole incident with Terach and the astrologers and everything, and Avinu was able to, sort of live with his parents again. Everyone knows the famous story with Avraham Avinu, Abraham in the idol shop of his father. And Avraham Avinu becomes the iconoclast. He destroys his father's idols and different things. And this behavior gets reported to Nimrod. And Abraham and Nimrod basically become, like 2 trains about to crash into each other. These 2 giant people, 2 very, very big people. Avraham Avinu in terms of his spiritual stature, and Nimrod in terms of his following, in terms of his power here on earth. And there's going to be a tremendous duel about to happen between the 2. When Nimrod hears about Avraham Avinu And what he's doing to the idol is that he's disparaging sort of the state religion and saying that no, Nimrod, of course, can't be a god. Nimrod challenges him. He says, you have to start bowing down to me. Avraham Avinu refuses. And he throws him into prison. And he sits in prison for 10 years. Avraham Avinu was in prison for 10 years. And we can imagine, just the, if you would think about it, what Avraham Avinu's thoughts might have been. At least what would my thoughts have been in that situation? I would think, I don't understand. I just devoted myself to God. I'm living by the truth. And yet now I'm spending years and years and years. I don't know when it's going to end in the dungeon of Nimrod's prison. Why is this happening to me? I'm fighting for the truth. Why is it not working out for me? Right? That would probably be what I would think, and probably lesser people than Avraham Avinu would be thinking like that. But still, Avraham Avinu remains totally committed to God and decides, okay, whatever is going to happen here, I'm staying committed to God. And we'll see how this ends, what's going to go on. At the end of 10 years, Nimrod decides, I'm going to make a spectacle out of this, teach my civilization a lesson over here. I'm going to give him one last chance. If he bows down to me, bows down to the idols that are here, I'll let him live. If not, I'm going to throw him into the Kivshana Eish, the fiery furnace. Of course, Avraham Avinu refuses outright, and he's thrown into the fiery furnace, and he's locked in there. I think I saw it said at least for a few days he was in there. And it says as he was thrown in, the angels pleaded to God, like, can we go do something? Can we help him? And God says, just as he's a unique person down here, I'm unique up there. I myself am going to go down, and I'm going to keep Avraham Avinu alive. So God himself was the one to protect Abraham in the flames. And when they opened the Kivshana Eish, when they opened this oven a few days later, they saw him walking around like he, was taking a stroll in a garden, which was an unbelievable miracle, and it made a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. So that's the story between Abraham and Nimrod. Ultimately, Terach and Abraham decide, okay, we got to get out of Nimrod's territory, so that's when they go towards Haran. That's not that's not the end of the story of Nimrod, however. Does anyone know, I think we might have asked this, does anyone know how Nimrod died? Does anyone know?
No.
I'll give you a hint. He was murdered. Does anyone know who he was murdered by?
I'm going to throw out Derek.
Terach? Interesting. That's an interesting idea. That's an interesting idea. I'll give you another hint then. It was a descendant of Terach. It was.
Terach, however you say it.
And it is?
Nor?
Who? Okay, I'll go a different direction. Who would have been very interested in having these special hunting garments?
Oh, I think of E.
The brother of Jacob.
Esav, yeah.
Yeah.
Esav.
Yeah.
It says Esav
Asa.
murdered
Yeah.
Nimrod in order to take these special hunting garments, and Esav was able to put them to use himself, whether that was literally in terms of using them towards hunting or figuratively in the sense of trapping people in his false ideologies and in Avodah Zarah and in, chasing after the pleasures of the world as opposed to devoting himself to God. Esav used these garments for his own benefit. So that was the demise of Nimrod. Okay? That's basically
Nimrod was pretty old by then.
He was pretty old by then. That's a good point. Yeah, he was. That's a good point. So again, so we have a bunch of different chapters in Nimrod's life. There was Bavel. There's these sort of gaining power through the use of these garments. There's the threat to his kingdom, his duel with Abraham, and ultimately his demise at the hands of Esav. See, a lot of times the evil people are killed by other evil people. That's an interesting thing. So I want to analyze a little bit, and hopefully we'll be able to make it somewhat relevant to us. Who was Nimrod on the inside? What was his main undoing in terms of his negative character traits and tendencies.
Rabbi.
It's 25? 26. Thank you. Okay. So, Nimrod, it says, he was considered, I'll just find it. Yeah. So, Rashi says regarding Nimrod, right? The verse says that anyone who has a certain midah, a certain characteristic that was possessed by Nimrod is referred to like a Nimrod. He was like a Nimrod. What trait is that? Rashi says, Al Kain Yomer Al Kol Adam, on any person, Marshia, who commits evil, be'azis ponim, with boldness, with chutzpah. Right? That's a Nimrod. If a person commits evil with a chutzpah, with a, I'm going to do it, thinking of a certain example in my head, which maybe I'll share after class. That person, that's a Nimrod. So what is azus? What is boldness? What is this midah of azus, of chutzpah? Let's talk about it. It says, az panim legehenim. A person who has a trait of azus, of chutzpah, boldness in a negative sense, such a person is set up to go to purgatory, to Gehenna, and suffer. Why? What's so bad about this midah? So, on the other hand, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It says, "Have az k'nemer." Be bold like a leopard. Az k'nemer. I noticed today. I haven't seen anyone point this out. It's my own. I think it's my own idea. I don't know. It could be it's totally wrong. Nemer is the same letters as Nimrod.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting thing, right? So Nemer, or a leopard, same letters as Nimrod. Again, Nimrod seems to be coming mainly from the root of morod, rebel, but there's also a nun there, which could also have Nemer. So you have both Nemer and Martyr. So he was this very bold person who was willing to go against God.
Mm-hmm.
So when is it good? When is it bad? When are you supposed to have azus? When are you not supposed to have azus? The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us you should be az kenemer. On the other hand, we see a person who with azus, with his boldness, goes to Gehenna, to purgatory. How do we to understand these things? How does Avraham Avinu fit in? So I think it's clear from this. Avraham Avinu and Nimrod were opposites. They were like oil and water, fire and water. They were complete opposites. So if we look at Avraham Avinu, what were his special traits? We'll be able to understand what Nimrod's undoing was. Avraham Avinu is associated with a few particular character traits. One of them was his chesed, his kindness that he was able to show others. He was able to put himself second and totally devote himself to other people first. Chesed is actually associated with water. Water is associated with chesed. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the way Nimrod wanted to kill Avraham Avinu was through fire. Azus and anger are very related to each other. Azus and anger, boldness and anger are very, very related to each other.
And Nimrod comes from Cham, which is hot.
That's good. That's very good. That's a good connection. I like it.
He's on fire tonight, isn't he?
I would like to point it out that Nimrod is descended from Cham. The Cham is heat. Cham is heat. So it's not a coincidence that the way Nimrod wanted to kill Avraham Avinu was through fire, through this midah of azus and anger. That was how Nimrod was going to be able to kill Abraham. But Abraham is the midah, like I said, a chesed of water. He was able to cool that fiery anger down and live to tell the tale. So Avraham Avinu, another thing he says, he's like Offer ve'efer. He says, I'm like dust and ashes. He held himself feel like a nothing almost, in a sense. Nimrod was the king of the world. He's like, I'm a deity. He's the exact opposite. You see, they're foils to each other. They're total opposite of each other. Avraham Avinu wanted to bring people close to God, to bring people towards their true purpose in the world, and Nimrod wanted to totally bring them down to physicality, towards lust, towards all the negative things that people have been involved in. So that's part of, I think, the story between Nimrod and Avraham, this fight between self-centeredness through forgetting our debt to our Creator, and the sense of self-negation, of chesed, of humility that Abraham represented. So now that we have a little bit about Nimrod, a little bit about his connection to Abraham, a little bit of history, I just want to, hopefully we'll extract a couple of principles, practical lessons. I always like to end with some practical lessons. What does it mean that have az k'nemar? Why are you supposed to be bold? You said boldness is such a bad thing. So what's the difference? When is boldness good? When is it bad? When you're bold in the pursuit of truth, that's a good boldness. If you're bold and you'll go and you'll ask your teacher a question, I don't understand this, it's a little embarrassing, but you're bold anyway, and you'll even wait and embarrass yourself to ask a question. You don't understand something in Torah learning. You want to get to the truth. Assertiveness. That's a very holy thing. That's called a holy boldness. Azus de kedusha. That's what the Swarm call it. So when a person has azus and it's devoted to emes, to the pursuit of emes, that's a holy thing. But when azus is devoted towards lies, sheker, to self-centeredness, that's when boldness becomes an evil thing. That's when it becomes a bad thing. So we want to be bold, but we want to use that boldness in the right way towards emes, with the midah of emes informing how we use our boldness. Nimrod built his whole worldview around what would put him in power and give him followers. And he was able to convince an entire generation of people to follow his lies. That's this unholy boldness that we're talking about. When you devote yourself to a lie,
He may have been the first social media influencer.
very good, very good. There's a lot, yeah. So just to bring it down to like really practical nowadays, like there's so many things that people nowadays buy into as being true, but are totally built on air, built on really thin air, built on nothingness. Pursuits that people have, the things they're into, the values they have are not being informed by Torah, are not being informed by a transcendent God who can say, this is good and this is bad. When you don't have that compass, you'll devote yourself to ideologies, to values that you may not even realize are lies. They may even feel like truth. The people that followed Nimrod felt, wow, this is really the guy to follow. This is the person who can provide for us. This is the person who can provide for our security, for our economic prosperity. This is the person, he was, if we could call it, he was a humanist. He put humanity at the center of reality. Humanity at the center of reality, and God was not part of that calculation. And when people use that reasoning of let's put humanity at the center and forget about God, they can come to all sorts of warped, crazy ideologies that leave, that could lead a person to killing 700,000 infants. Lo aleinu. So these are, and unfortunately throughout history we see this happen again and again. It's not, Nimrod wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last either. And maybe he was the first, but he definitely wasn't the last. It's hard to do, but I think everyone should could, if they try, put themselves in a vision. What would it be like to be living in a society like Nimrod's, where this is what society is devoting themselves to? Where would you be? Where would you put yourself? Would it be difficult to try to swim against that current? Nowadays, we have to do this. Anyone who's living with a godly, informed set of values is going to be swimming against the current. So I think we can get a lot of encouragement from the story of Abraham against Nimrod. What Abraham was able to accomplish, bringing the entire world, in a sense, back to Hashem. He was able to bring many, many people close back to God. It's another topic in and of itself. But we can get a lot of encouragement from what Abraham accomplished, especially how he was able to go against the king of the world, go against Nimrod, go against what everyone believed at the time. And we have to think, we're living in that, in a sense. There are ideologies and things that people hold nowadays that are fly in the face of anything godly. And we may even, in a sense, hold of them. It's to that extent that you may, while you devote yourself to Torah, devote yourself to tefillah, you wear black and white like I do, you may still have in yourself certain ideologies and things that you hold on to, and you don't realize that they're lies. You have to really be very, very self-aware, constantly learn Torah, and not trust yourself too much about what you think truth and falsehood are. So that's what we have today for Nimrod. How could we survive? How are we going to survive in a time like Nimrod? I don't think it's a theoretical question. I think it's a very, very practical question. And the person has to devote time to think about this. What would you be doing in the times of Nimrod? What are you doing right now to be like Avraham Avinu and not succumb like all the people in the generation of Nimrod did? It's a very practical question. I hope everyone thinks about it, and thank you everyone for tuning in tonight.